I caught my cheating husband with my daughter-in-law, so I swapped his massage oil for glue, and the firefighters had to pull them apart. I'm not proud of what I did, but I don't regret it either. Would you forgive your husband if the woman he betrayed you with was your own daughter-in-law? I didn't scream. I didn't throw a plate. I just stood there. It's strange how quiet betrayal can sound like the hum of the refrigerator in the middle of the night. I'd been married to Tom for 40 years. 40 years of school lunches, mortgage payments, Christmas photos with fake smiles, and the smell of his aftershave every morning. I thought we were unbreakable. But one afternoon proved I was wrong. That day, my son Mark and I were supposed to go shopping for his birthday gift. He'd forgotten his wallet and went back inside. I stayed in the car. 5 minutes later, he still hadn't come out. When I walked back toward the house, I heard laughter coming from the kitchen, low, intimate, familiar. I peered through the window. Tom, and my daughter-in-law, Lila, her hand on his chest, his lips on hers. I froze. I remember the color of the curtains, the smell of roast chicken still in the oven, the tiny clicking of the ceiling fan. That's the moment my marriage ended, though neither of them noticed. People always ask, what would you do if you caught your spouse cheating? Most imagine a scene screaming, slapping, maybe a shattered vase. But sometimes the most dangerous woman in the room is the one who says nothing. I walked away quietly. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't confront them. I just waited, observed. Because silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. That night, Tom asked what was for dinner. Your favorite, I said. Meatloaf. He smiled, kissed my cheek. His lips still smelled like her perfume. For 3 weeks I watched them play pretend. Church on Sundays, family dinners, the perfect act. And every night, when he said he was going to the gym, Lila's car disappeared 10 minutes later. I started noticing patterns. The same shirt he wore after workouts, the hidden receipts from massage oils, the text that read, same place, same time. I didn't rage. I researched. Because when you've been a loyal wife for 40 years and they treat your faithfulness like furniture, they don't deserve your tears. They deserve precision. And that's when I found it. His little bottle of relaxing massage oil, the one he bragged about using after long days. I picked it up, held it to the light. Thick, golden, oily. And then a thought crossed my mind so dark it almost made me laugh. What if relaxation turned into a nightmare? People think revenge is loud. It isn't. It's the sound of a drawer sliding open, the cap twisting off, the faint glug 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 of glue replacing oil. I'm not proud of what I did, but I don't regret it either. They say forgiveness makes you free. But freedom tastes different when you've spent decades swallowing humiliation. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror. Same wrinkles, same woman, but my eyes looked new, calm, certain. Would you have done the same? Because I know some of you would call me evil. Some would call me brilliant. And maybe both are true. Some call me cruel. I call it closure. So tell me, if you caught your husband with your daughter-in-law, would you walk away? Or make them remember you forever? Comment below, I want to hear your truth. I didn't sleep that night. I laid there, staring at the ceiling fan as it circled above me, slow and steady, like time refusing to stop. Tom's breathing beside me was calm, rhythmic, like he'd just run a marathon of lies and fallen asleep right after. At 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed, put on my robe, and made tea. Peppermint, his least favorite. He always said it smelled too clean. I sat at the table, the same one where we'd celebrated birthdays and graduations, and I started listing everything I'd ignored. The perfume that wasn't mine, the lipstick stain on his coffee mug, the sudden business trips. How long had I been pretending not to see it? How long had I been the perfect wife to a man rehearsing his betrayal every day? The next morning, Tom acted like nothing had happened, kissed my cheek, called me honey, told me he'd be home late. I smiled. Don't work too hard, I said. When he left, I cleaned the kitchen not because it was dirty, but because I needed to move, needed to feel control. And as I wiped down the counter, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He's with her again. Check the spa on 5th Avenue. My hands shook. Not from fear, from confirmation. I didn't reply. Instead, I put on my coat, drove downtown, and parked across the street from that little boutique spa with the green awning. And there they were. Through the glass front door, Tom, laughing. Lila, in her white coat, pretending to be a customer. Her hand brushed his arm like it was choreography. They looked happy, like two people who believed they'd never be caught. That's what stung the most, not just the betrayal, but the ease of it. I stayed there for 20 minutes, watching through the glass. The receptionist smiled at them. Tom handed her a small gift bag. A bottle of his favorite massage oil peeked from the top. My fingers clenched around the steering wheel. I felt my pulse in my ears, but I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered, "You want peace, Tom? I'll give you peace." That night, I made dinner again, chicken and mashed potatoes. He ate like nothing was wrong. "How was your day?" I asked. "Busy," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Mine too." I smiled when I said it. That's how you know the devil's coming, she always smiles first. After he went to bed, I went to the garage. The air smelled of paint thinner and motor oil. The kind of smell that lingers on your hands. On the shelf, behind the toolbox, sat an old bottle of industrial glue, the one we'd used to fix a broken chair years ago. It was thick, sticky, and permanent. I remember holding that bottle, turning it in my hands, and thinking, he wanted something that would stick? He's about to get it. The next morning, I woke up early. Tom was in the shower. I walked to the bathroom, opened the cabinet, and found his little bottle of massage oil sitting there, golden and innocent. The smell made me nauseous. I poured it out slowly, thick, viscous, sliding into the drain, and replaced it with the glue. My hands didn't shake. They were steady. Too steady. When I was done, I placed the bottle exactly where it had been. I even wiped the counter, just so no one could tell. He came out, towel around his waist. "Knew you'd be up early," he said, grinning. "Going to see Lila later. She asked for help with her car." I forced a chuckle. "You're such a good father-in-law." He kissed my cheek, still wet from the shower. If he'd looked at my eyes, maybe he'd have seen it, the calm before his storm. That evening, I cooked dinner for one. I turned on the radio, poured myself a glass of wine, and waited. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Around 8:15, I heard a faint noise outside. Sirens. Then another. They got louder. Closer. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message, same unknown number. "You should turn on the news." I did. The headline read, "Firefighters called to local spa after bizarre accident involving couple." The image was blurry, but I didn't need to see their faces. The world finally saw what betrayal looked like. Sticky, messy, humiliating. I took a sip of wine. I didn't laugh. Not yet. People think revenge is about rage. It's not. It's about restoration of balance, of power, of self. After 40 years of silence, I finally had my voice back. And it sounded a lot like sirens. I turned off the TV, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself. Same woman. Different eyes. Would you have done it? Would you have kept quiet? Or made them remember? I know what I chose. And that's why I slept peacefully for the first time in years. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm not sorry either. Tell me, do you think she deserved it, or did I go too far? Comment below. I'm listening. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of burnt toast. Tom wasn't home. For a moment, I almost forgot what had happened. Almost. The phone rang. It was my neighbor, Susan. "Have you seen the news?" she asked, half laughing, half whispering. "No," I said, pretending confusion. She giggled like a schoolgirl. "Well, your Tom sure made the morning headlines." I held the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" "Oh, honey," she said, "the firefighters had to break into the spa downtown. A couple got stuck, together, physically. I swear. I thought it was one of those fake news stories till I saw your husband's car in the shot." I didn't say a word. I just thanked her, hung up, and sat down at the kitchen table. The silence in the house was heavier than usual. You'd think I'd be laughing, or crying, or something. But I just felt still. After 40 years of being invisible, suddenly I was the woman everyone whispered about. By noon, my son Mark called. His voice was frantic. "Mom, have you seen Dad?" "Why?" I asked, steady. "He's in the hospital. Something happened at the spa. They're saying they got glued together." I bit my lip to keep from smiling. "That sounds terrible," I said softly. "Yeah," he sighed. "The press is all over it. Lila's mom is freaking out." When he said her name, my chest tightened. I remembered her face at Thanksgiving, the polite smile, the way she called me Mom like it meant something. And now she was the other woman. Mark continued. "The doctors said they were in serious pain. Some kind of chemical reaction. Must have been quite the bond, I said. He didn't catch the irony. That evening, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Everyone was talking about it. Half the women were cheering me on. The other half were clutching their pearls, saying, "Revenge is never the answer." Funny thing, though those saying that were mostly the ones whose husbands had cheated too. They didn't hate what I did. They hated that I did it first. I scrolled through the comments online. Serves him right. She's my hero. This is abuse, not justice. Finally, a woman who doesn't just cry, she acts. And somewhere in between those lines, I realized something. The world doesn't want women like me to stay quiet. But they don't really want us loud, either. They just want us to hurt neatly. Well, I wasn't built for neat. The police came 2 days later. Officer Ramirez, polite but nervous, asked me if I knew anything about the incident. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, "the investigation shows that someone tampered with the oil bottle found in the spa. Do you have any idea how that could have happened?" I looked him straight in the eyes. "I have no idea, officer. I don't even go there." He nodded, took notes, and left. But before he walked out the door, he turned back and said quietly, "For what it's worth, I don't think anyone blames you." That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The crickets sang, the stars looked closer than ever. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel small. But then the guilt crept in slow, unwanted. Mark hadn't spoken much since the hospital visit. He was torn between two loyalties he didn't ask for. And that's when I started questioning myself. Not what I did, but who it hurt. Was my revenge justice or just collateral damage with lipstick? I tried to pray that night, but instead of words, all I heard was the echo of that laughter from the kitchen the day I first caught them. It wasn't about sex, it wasn't about betrayal, it was about respect. And once that's gone, there's nothing left to forgive. The next morning, a reporter showed up at my door. Young, bright-eyed, too curious for her own good. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said, "we're running a story about the spa incident. Do you have a comment?" I stared at her for a long moment, then smiled. "Just one," I said. "Super glue really holds up." She laughed awkwardly. I didn't. That line made it to the article headline. And just like that, the internet turned me into a meme. People called me the glue wife. Some said I was brilliant. Others said I was insane. Either way, they remembered me. For once, I wasn't just the background of my own life. But when I looked at my son's eyes the next day, I saw something that hurt more than betrayal ever did. Disappointment. Not because of what I did, but because he knew why I did it. He didn't say it out loud, but I could see it. He feared that the woman who raised him had become something darker. And maybe I had. But sometimes you have to walk through the fire to remember you can burn. Would I do it again? Maybe not. But I can't say I wouldn't think about it. Because in a world that forgives men for their mistakes, a woman's revenge is always called madness. But tell me if madness is what it takes to make them stop underestimating us. Then maybe it's worth every drop of glue. Justice doesn't always come from the law. Sometimes it comes from the kitchen drawer. So now tell me, if it were you, and your husband betrayed you with your own daughter-in-law, would you forgive? Or would you let karma get sticky too? The following week, I couldn't go anywhere without hearing whispers. At the grocery store, 2 women were pretending to compare tomatoes while stealing glances at me. "That's her," one of them muttered. "The glue wife." The other one giggled. Good for her, I'd have done worse. I didn't react. I just kept picking apples, pretending not to hear. Funny thing, when people don't know how to process what you've done, they either laugh or worship you. By the time I got home, there were 3 reporters parked outside. One of them called out, "Mrs. Jenkins, do you regret what happened?" I smiled. Regret is for people who didn't mean it. That line made the evening news. Within 24 hours, I had hundreds of messages on Facebook. Some were from women I'd never met, sharing stories of their own betrayals. One wrote, "You gave us all a voice." Another said, "My husband better sleep with one eye open." But not everyone cheered. There were just as many calling me a monster. 2 people could have died from that glue, one comment read. "Violence isn't justice," another said. And then the ones that cut deeper, "You're no better than them." It was strange how I could be both hero and villain in the same breath. The local church even mentioned me during Sunday service. Pastor Williams, with that soft, disappointed tone, said, "Revenge may feel sweet, but it rots the soul." Everyone nodded politely. But half of those women texted me later saying, "He doesn't know what it's like." And they were right. No one really knows what betrayal feels like until it wears your husband's face. Tom was discharged from the hospital 3 days later. Mark drove him home. I stayed in the garden, pruning the roses. When they arrived, Tom wouldn't look at me. His face was pale, tired, but mostly ashamed. Not because of the affair, because he'd become a spectacle. "Mom," Mark said quietly, "Dad wants to talk." I kept trimming the thorns. "I don't think there's anything left to say." Tom stepped closer. "I never meant to hurt you." I finally looked up. "You didn't mean to get caught," he sighed. "Do you have any idea what I've been through?" That made me laugh, a real, sharp laugh that startled even me. "What you've been through?" I said. "You glued yourself to your lover, you humiliated our family, and you're asking for sympathy?" Mark tried to step in. "Mom, please." But I raised my hand. "No, sweetheart, let him speak. Let the man who destroyed 2 marriages explain how he's the victim." Tom's face went red. "You've turned this whole town against me." "No," I said calmly. "You did that when you chose her." He left that night, took a bag and drove off without saying goodbye. The next morning, Lila's parents came to my door. Her mother's eyes were swollen from crying. "You ruined her life," she said. I looked her straight in the eye. "She ruined mine first." She opened her mouth to argue but couldn't find words. I closed the door gently and went back to making coffee. For the first time in decades, the house was quiet in a different way. Not empty, peaceful, like it had been waiting for me to breathe again. But peace doesn't stay long when the internet knows your name. By Friday, I was trending on TikTok. Clips of the news, memes, reaction videos, everyone had an opinion. A talk show even discussed me in their Morality of Revenge segment. One host said, "This woman is brilliant, she found a way to make cheaters terrified." The other replied, "No, she's dangerous. We can't glorify this kind of behavior." And just like that, the war began. Number, Team Glue versus number, Team Grace. Comments poured in. "She's the karma queen. She should be arrested." Men have been humiliating women for centuries now. One fights back and suddenly everyone's moral. "She's teaching our daughters to be vengeful." Every side had a point. And that's what made it powerful. But the one thing nobody noticed? I never actually said I did it. Not once. I watched the chaos unfold like a spectator at my own trial. And in some twisted way, it felt good. Not because I wanted fame, but because for once, my silence was louder than his lies. Then one afternoon, Mark came home, eyes heavy. "Mom," he said, "I talked to Lila." I froze. "She wants to apologize," he continued. "She says she doesn't know what she was thinking. She said it was complicated." "Complicated?" I whispered. "You betray your husband and your mother-in-law, and it's complicated?" He shrugged helplessly. "She said you scared her." "Good. I wanted her scared. Not because of me, but because she should be." Mark sat across from me, quiet for a while. Then he said something that I didn't expect. "Mom, I think you scared me too." The words hit harder than any betrayal ever could. I looked at my son, the one I raised to be kind, patient, forgiving, and saw fear in his eyes. And for the first time, I didn't feel powerful. I felt small again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed everything in my mind. The glue, the laughter, the headlines. At what point did I stop punishing them and start punishing myself? When I went outside to breathe, I saw the mailbox overflowing with letters, handwritten ones. Women from all over the country writing to thank me, to tell me they finally felt seen. "Your story gave me courage," one said. "After watching you, I finally left my cheating husband." I cried reading that one. Because maybe, in some strange way, my story wasn't about revenge at all. Maybe it was about survival. And still, deep down, I knew this was far from over. Karma isn't a one-time show, it's a series. The world wanted a villain. I became one. The world wanted a hero. They found one in me too. But the truth? I'm just a woman who finally stopped apologizing for her anger. They called me crazy. But when a man burns everything you've built, it's only fair he gets to feel the heat too. Now tell me, if your son's wife and your husband betrayed you together, would you burn bridges? Or build your own legend? The world moves on faster than guilt does. One week I was the glue wife, the next there was a new scandal on the news. But for me, everything still felt stuck, literally and metaphorically. People stopped calling. At first, it was peaceful. No pity, no judgment, just silence. Then the silence turned heavy. When the phone finally rang again, it wasn't friends, it was reporters asking if I'd like to tell my side of the story. My side. Funny how everyone wants your side, but no one really wants the truth. I started taking walks early in the morning, before the town woke up. I'd pass the bakery, the church, the park bench where Tom and I used to sit every Sunday after service. I wondered if the bench missed us, or if it was just relieved we were gone. One morning, I saw Lila. She was at the pharmacy, wearing sunglasses, her face red and raw from whatever treatment the hospital had done. Our eyes met for a second. She froze. I just smiled and said, "Morning." She didn't answer. She turned away, trembling like she'd seen a ghost. And maybe she had. I thought seeing her would make me feel powerful again, but instead I felt hollow. It wasn't satisfaction anymore, it was the echo of it, like eating sugar long after it's lost its sweetness. Later that day, I went to visit Mark. He was packing boxes in his garage. "You moving somewhere?" I asked. He hesitated. "We're taking a break. Lila's staying with her parents." I nodded. "Probably for the best." He didn't look up. "Mom, I need to know something." "Ask." He took a deep breath. "Did you really do it?" There it was, the question hanging between us since everything started. Did I? Could I admit it to my own son? I stared at him, then said softly, "Does it matter?" He shook his head. "It does to me." I wanted to tell him the truth. That I'd acted out of love, twisted into anger, that I'd spent decades being quiet, patient, loyal. And this was the only time I felt heard. But the words wouldn't come. So instead, I said the safest thing I could. I did what I needed to do. Mark sighed. "You didn't need to destroy everything." I smiled sadly. "Sweetheart, it was already destroyed. I just stopped pretending it wasn't." He didn't answer. He just went back to packing. That silence between us was worse than any insult. Because disappointment doesn't need words, it breathes all on its own. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the dark. The clock ticked loudly. It's funny how time sounds different when you're alone. I used to think revenge would make me feel lighter, but it turns out freedom can be lonely too. The next few days blurred together. I cooked for one, ate for one, and spoke to no one. Even Susan stopped dropping by, probably tired of choosing sides. At night, I'd scroll through the comments again. Some still called me a hero. Others said I was a warning. One woman wrote, "You're brave, but you've made it harder for the rest of us to be believed." That one hurt the most. I started to wonder if maybe I had gone too far. Not because they didn't deserve it, but because I'd become what I hated most. Someone who lied. Not to others, to myself. Because deep down, I didn't just want revenge. I wanted remorse. I wanted him to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. I wanted proof that I'd mattered. But instead, I got silence. And silence doesn't apologize. One evening, I decided to clean out the closet. At the very back, under old coats, I found our wedding album. Dust covered it like time's version of shame. I sat on the floor, flipping through the pages, smiling faces, clasped hands, the promise of forever. He looked so young, so sure. And I wondered, when exactly did he stop loving me? Or did he ever? I tore out one picture, the one where he was holding my hand, eyes full of fake devotion. I burned it in the kitchen sink. The smell of burning paper filled the air, sweet and bitter at the same time. Maybe that's what closure really smells like. A few days later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside, a single sentence in Tom's handwriting. "I hope you're happy now." No apology. No explanation. Just that. I stared at it for a long time before laughing out loud. Happy? No, Tom. I wasn't happy. But I was awake. And sometimes that's more dangerous. That night, I dreamt I was standing in front of a mirror. Only, it wasn't my reflection staring back, it was Lila's. She smiled, but her eyes were mine. Tired, angry, alive. When I woke up, I couldn't tell if it was a nightmare or a warning. By morning, the headlines had moved on. No one cared about the glue wife anymore. But my name still echoed in quiet corners at the market, the salon, the whispers of women who said, "I'd never do that," but secretly wondered if they could. I was alone, yes. But I wasn't invisible anymore. And that, somehow, made the loneliness bearable. People think revenge makes you bitter. Maybe. But it also makes you visible, and after a lifetime of being unseen, I'll take bitter over invisible any day. Now, tell me if doing the right thing means disappearing. Would you still rather be the good one? It's strange how fame feels when you never asked for it. People recognize your name before they recognize your pain. They think they know you because they read a headline. They don't. For the first time in my life, strangers stopped me on the street. Some whispered, "You're amazing." Others said nothing, just gave me that look, half fear, half fascination. At first, I played along. I smiled. I said, "Thank you." But the truth? Every compliment felt like salt, because they weren't really praising me. They were praising the idea of me. The woman who took down her cheating husband. The one who dared to do what they only dreamed of. But I'm not a superhero. I'm a tired woman who finally stopped swallowing humiliation. Every night, I'd open my phone and scroll through videos. Thousands of people reenacting my story. Some made jokes. Others called me an icon. One even made a song about me. "Stick to your man," the chorus said. Clever. And yet, the more viral I became, the lonelier it felt. Because none of those people saw the sleepless nights, the shaking hands, the silence that followed. They laughed at my revenge. But they didn't see what came after. Tom moved out of town. Lila filed for divorce from Mark. My son barely spoke to either of us. The family dinners stopped. The house got quieter. Too quiet. I thought revenge would fill that emptiness. It didn't. It just changed its shape. One morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror while brushing my hair. Same woman. Different eyes. There was something colder there now, something I didn't recognize. I whispered to my reflection, "Who are you?" She didn't answer. She smirked. That day, I decided to clean up the house. Maybe I thought order could fix chaos. As I vacuumed, the radio host mentioned me again. The infamous glue wife whose story sparked a national debate on revenge ethics. I turned it off. Too loud. Too personal. Too real. Later, I met Susan at the coffee shop. She hesitated before sitting down. "You look good," she said. "Do I?" I asked. She sipped her latte, nervous. "People still talk about you. Half of them say you're brilliant. The other half, they say you need therapy." I laughed. Maybe they're both right. Susan leaned in. "Would you do it again?" I paused. That was the question everyone asked. Reporters, neighbors, even myself. And every time, the answer changed. "Maybe," I said, "just not the same way." She nodded slowly. "I get it. Sometimes we just want to be heard." I smiled sadly. "No, Susan. Sometimes we just want them to hurt the way we did." That night, I stood by the mirror again. The one in the hallway with the cracked corner. Every woman has that mirror, the one that knows too much. I looked into it and saw not just me, but every woman who'd ever been lied to, and smiled through it. I realized I wasn't just fighting Tom. I was fighting every moment I'd let myself be small. Maybe that's why people related to my story. It wasn't about glue. It was about finally sticking up for ourselves. The next day, I got an email from a TV producer. They wanted to turn my story into a movie. "Your revenge is legendary," they wrote. "Viewers love a strong woman." I read it twice and closed my laptop. They didn't want a strong woman. They wanted a spectacle. But a strange thought crept in. What if I said yes? What if I played myself in the movie? Would that be empowerment? Or addiction to attention? I didn't answer the email. Not yet. That night, I went to church for the first time in months. People stared. Whispers followed me to the pew. After the sermon, Pastor Williams approached me. "Juliet," he said, "you've been through a storm. But storms pass. You don't have to live in the rain forever." I nodded, tears threatening. "I don't know how to stop." He smiled softly. "Then maybe it's time to learn how to forgive yourself first." That hit harder than I expected. Because I hadn't forgiven myself. Not for the revenge. Not for the pain. Not for staying silent so long. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give others. It's the mercy you finally let yourself have. When I got home, I stood before that mirror again. The woman staring back was different now. Still strong, still sharp, but softer. Maybe power isn't about hurting them back. Maybe it's about finally putting the knife down. I touched the glass, whispered, "It's okay now." And for the first time in months, I believed it. They called me crazy. Maybe they're right, but in a world that lets men betray without consequence, a little madness might be the sanest thing we have. Now tell me, is forgiveness the end of revenge, or just another form of it? It had been 3 months since the fire trucks, the cameras, and the whispers. The town had finally stopped talking. But my story wasn't finished yet because he came back. Tom. He showed up one rainy afternoon, unannounced. No call, no text, just that old blue pickup truck pulling into the driveway like nothing had happened. I watched from the kitchen window, coffee in hand. Part of me wanted to hide. The other part wanted him to see what peace looked like without him in it. He stood on the porch, soaked, hesitant. For a man who once strutted through this door like he owned the air, he suddenly looked small. When I opened the door, neither of us spoke at first. The rain filled the silence. Finally, he said, "You look different." I smiled. "That's because I am." He nodded, looking down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. "I didn't know where else to go," he said quietly. "Home isn't always where you go back to," I answered. "Sometimes it's what you lose." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I came to apologize," he said. I waited. "I was stupid, Juliet. Lila was. I don't even know. You just wanted to feel young again." I finished for him. He looked up, startled. "How did you—" "Because that's what all men say when they ruin a good thing." He swallowed hard. "You humiliated me." I laughed sharp, but not cruel. "You humiliated yourself. I just gave you a stage." He flinched at that. For the first time, I saw shame, not guilt, not pity, but real shame, cross his face. "I lost everything," he said. "So did I replied. "Difference is, I rebuilt mine." He stepped closer, voice cracking. "Do you ever think we could fix it?" That made me pause. Not because I wanted him back, but because there was a time when that question would have broken me. Now, it just sounded absurd. "Fix it?" I repeated. "Tom, you glued yourself to your son's wife. There isn't enough forgiveness in the world to fix that." He winced, looked away. "I deserved that." "Yes," I said softly. "You did." We stood there in silence again, both of us older, emptier, but finally honest. For a second, I almost pitied him. Almost. "I heard you're some kind of celebrity now," he said, trying to sound casual. "Not by choice." He smiled weakly. "Guess I made you famous." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You made me visible. I made myself famous." That shut him up. Then his tone changed, softer, almost pleading. "Juliet, I'm sick." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "The doctors say it's my heart. Too many years of bad habits." He chuckled darkly. "Guess karma's got a sense of humor, huh?" For a moment, everything inside me twisted. Anger, sadness, guilt. All the emotions I thought I'd buried came crawling back like vines. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared so many meals and so many lies. "I don't expect you to care," he said, "but I didn't want to die without saying sorry." I stood there, arms crossed, watching the man who'd been my husband, my betrayer, my ghost. He looked fragile, human in a way he never had before. "Do you know what the worst part was, Tom?" I said finally. He looked up, confused. It wasn't the cheating. It wasn't even her. What was it then? It was realizing that I spent 40 years loving someone who never really saw me. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's true. I was wallpaper, you only noticed me when something cracked." He was crying now, silent tears, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than pride. "I did love you," he whispered. "Maybe," I said, "but love without respect is just habit, and habits are hard to break." For the first time in months, I felt lighter. Like the glue wasn't just his punishment, it was my release. He looked up. "Can I ask one thing?" "Depends." "Did you really do it?" The infamous question again. I smiled faintly. "Does it matter?" He exhaled. "To me, yeah." I leaned forward, met his eyes, and said softly, "Let's just say I learned from the best liar I know." He laughed, a broken sound. "You always were sharper than me." Then he stood, buttoning his coat slowly. "Well," he said, "guess I'll let you be." At the door, he turned back. "For what it's worth, Juliet, you won." I shook my head. "No, Tom. Nobody wins in betrayal. We just survive it differently." He left without another word. I watched his truck disappear down the road, swallowed by rain. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger or satisfaction. Just peace. That night, I poured myself another cup of coffee and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The garden glistened, every drop catching the porch light like tiny diamonds. I realized something, then revenge had ended, but closure had finally arrived. Not because he came back, but because I didn't need him to anymore. The next morning, I found a small envelope slipped under the door. It was from Mark. Inside, a note in his handwriting. I saw Dad. I know what he did, and I know what you did. I don't blame you anymore. I just hope you both find peace. I cried, then real tears this time. Not from anger, not from grief. From relief. Because for the first time in my life, my son didn't see me as a monster or a victim. He saw me as human. I walked to the mirror again. Same reflection. But this time, she smiled back, no smirk, no armor, just quiet strength. Revenge was never about making him suffer. It was about reminding myself I could still feel. Tell me if the person who broke you came back asking forgiveness. Would you open the door? Or let the rain wash them away? After Tom left that day, the house felt different. Not empty or cleaner. Like the air finally remembered how to breathe again. The silence that used to haunt me now felt peaceful. I didn't realize it at first, but that visit was the end of one story and the start of another. I spent the next morning sitting on the porch, watching the rain dry off the garden. It was funny how quickly life tries to go back to normal after chaos. The birds still came for crumbs. The mail still arrived. The world didn't stop just because mine once had. Among the mail was another envelope, this one from a women's magazine. They wanted to feature me in an article titled, "The Wife Who Fought Back." I laughed out loud. Fought back? That wasn't what I'd done. I'd snapped. There's a difference. But their letter got me thinking. Maybe my story could help someone. Maybe if I told it the right way without the shock, without the glue, someone else might feel less alone. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with an old notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "How I became the villain and survived it." The words came slowly at first, then faster. I wrote about the silence, the suspicion, the betrayal, the laughter in that kitchen. I didn't write to blame. I wrote to understand. Because somewhere between anger and peace, there's clarity. And I think I'd finally found it. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Mark. "Can I come over tomorrow?" When he arrived, he looked tired, but softer. He didn't stand in the doorway this time. He walked straight to me and hugged me. It caught me off guard. For months, we'd spoken like strangers. Now, he held me like a son again. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." I pulled back, confused. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Yes, I did," he said. "I let Dad's mistakes turn me against you. I didn't see how much you'd already been through." My throat tightened. "You shouldn't have to pick sides between parents." He shook his head. "I'm not picking sides anymore. I just want to stop being angry." We sat at the table together, the same one that had seen too much pain. He looked around and smiled faintly. "You changed the curtains." "Yeah," I said. "Figured it was time for new colors." He hesitated. "Did you mean what you told Dad? That you don't need him anymore?" I nodded. "I meant every word, but I don't hate him, Mark. Not anymore." He exhaled. "That's good. Hate's heavy." I smiled. "So is guilt." We talked for hours about childhood, about forgiveness, about what came next. For the first time, there was laughter between us again. Not the polite kind, but the kind that heals. After he left, I sat at my desk and finished writing my story. By dawn, it was 10 pages long. When I read it back, I didn't sound like a victim or a villain. I sounded human. The next week, I mailed it to the magazine. Not because I wanted more attention, but because I wanted the last word to be mine. No camera, no gossip, no glue, just truth. Days passed, then weeks. And one afternoon, I got a call. They were publishing it. They said it was raw, honest, and unlike anything they'd read. When the issue came out, I bought 5 copies from the corner store. The cashier recognized me and smiled. "You're the lady from the story, right?" I nodded. He handed me the magazine and said, "You know, my mom read it. She said it helped her leave my dad." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. That one sentence meant more than every comment online combined. That night, I stood in front of the mirror again. The same mirror that had seen me through heartbreak, rage, and reflection. But this time, I didn't ask it who I was. I told it, "I'm the woman who stayed too long, hurt too deep, and healed too late, but healed anyway. My reflection smiled back. Not with revenge, not with pride, with peace. A week later, Susan came by again. She brought coffee and gossip, like old times. "I read your article," she said, sipping her latte. "Half the women in town are talking about it." "Oh God," I groaned. "Good or bad?" She laughed. "Both. The church ladies think you've repented. The rest of us think you've evolved." I smiled. Maybe both are true. Before she left, she said, "Juliet, you know what I think?" "What?" "I think you scared the men, but you freed the women." That line stayed with me all night, because maybe that's what all of this was about. Not revenge, not justice. Freedom. Freedom from fear, from shame, from waiting for an apology that never comes. Freedom to look in the mirror and see someone worth forgiving. As the sun set, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The sky turned gold, then pink, then deep blue. And I thought, maybe peace isn't something that happens. Maybe it's something you choose over and over again. I closed my eyes, whispered to no one in particular, "I'm done fighting ghosts." And for the first time, I meant it. Revenge gave me power. Forgiveness gave me freedom. Maybe we need both to survive. Now, tell me, if you could erase your pain, would you do it? Even if it meant forgetting the strength it gave you. The funny thing about peace is, it doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in, quietly, like sunlight after a storm, touching everything that once looked ruined. That's what it felt like in the weeks after my article came out. Women started writing to me. Emails, letters, message. Some told me they finally left a cheating husband. Others said they just wanted to say thank you for making them laugh through the pain. For the first time in years, I felt useful again. Not as a wife, not as a victim, but as a woman who survived and decided to speak. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Claire in Ohio. She wrote, "I've been married 27 years. He's been unfaithful for at least 10. I always thought staying made me strong. But after reading your story, I realized that leaving might be the bravest thing I ever do." I cried reading that, because I'd spent so long thinking my story was shameful when really it was a mirror for thousands of others. And suddenly, I knew what I wanted to do next. A month later, I stood in front of a small audience at the local library. They'd invited me to give a talk for their Women Who Rise series. I almost said no. Public speaking terrified me. But then I thought about all those letters, about the women who whispered my name like a secret code for courage. So, I said yes. When I took the stage, my hands were shaking. The lights were warm, the crowd intimate. Mostly women my age, some younger, some older. All watching, waiting. I took a breath and said, "I never meant to be anyone's example. I just got tired of being invisible." The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the old ceiling fan. "I thought revenge would make me strong," I continued. "It didn't. It just made me loud enough to finally hear myself." They laughed softly, not mockery, understanding. And for the next hour, I told them everything. Not the viral version, not the tabloid twist, but the truth. How love can rot in silence. How women are taught to forgive everyone but themselves. And how healing doesn't mean forgetting it, means finally remembering who you were before the hurt. When I finished, they stood and clapped. Some cried. One woman hugged me so tight, I felt her heartbeat against mine. She whispered, "Thank you for saying what we can't." That night, driving home, I realized something powerful. My story didn't end in revenge. It began there. Over the next few months, I started volunteering at a local women's shelter. I didn't preach. I listened. Because sometimes, the most radical act isn't shouting your pain, it's hearing someone else's. There was one woman younger, nervous, with bruised eyes. She asked, "Did you ever regret it, what you did?" I smiled gently. "Every day, and not at all." She frowned. "How can both be true?" "Because healing isn't tidy," I said. "You can forgive and still wish things had gone differently. You can move on without pretending it didn't happen." She nodded slowly, eyes wet. And I thought if even one woman walked away stronger because I spoke, then maybe everything I endured had a purpose. One afternoon, I got a letter not from a stranger, but from Lila, the daughter-in-law. I almost threw it out, but curiosity won. She wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I left Mark years ago. I've been in therapy since. What we did was wrong, beyond words. I don't know if I loved Tom or if I just needed someone to notice me, but I want you to know, I never stopped thinking about you. You were kind to me once. I ruined that. I'm sorry. I read it twice, then again. And surprisingly, I didn't feel hate. I felt relief. Because closure doesn't come when they apologize. It comes when you can read their apology without your hands shaking. I didn't reply. Some stories don't need sequels. Instead, I folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and whispered, I hope you find peace too. A year later, my story got adapted into a podcast. They asked if I wanted to narrate it myself. At first, I hesitated. Then I said yes. As I sat in the recording booth, microphone in front of me, I realized something profound. I wasn't nervous, because I wasn't reliving the pain, I was reclaiming it. When I finished the last line, the producer smiled and said, That was perfect, Juliet. You sounded alive. I laughed. That's because I finally am. That night, I went home to an empty but peaceful house. I made tea, opened the window, and let the evening breeze roll in. The air smelled like lavender and rain. I looked out at the garden, new flowers blooming where the old ones had died. And I realized, maybe that's what healing is. Not forgetting what hurt you, but letting something else grow in its place. I picked up my notebook again. On a new page I wrote, I thought revenge was my ending. Turns out, it was just my beginning. I closed the notebook and smiled. Then I looked into the camera, because by now, I knew my audience was still watching somewhere, and said softly, We can't rewrite the past, but we can reclaim the pen. And if my story taught you anything, let it be this: you don't have to burn your pain to heal from it. You just have to stop carrying the ashes. It's strange, the way a story can outlive the pain that created it. When I first told mine, I thought it would fade like every headline does, quick, loud, forgotten. But it didn't. It kept echoing. Months passed. The podcast episode went viral not because of the scandal, but because of what came after. People said it wasn't about revenge at all. It was about rebirth. That word rebirth stuck with me, because that's exactly how it felt. Like I'd been torn apart, only to rebuild into something steadier, kinder, stronger. Soon after, I got a call from a university professor. She wanted me to speak to her psychology students about resilience and trauma recovery. Your story, she said, is the perfect example of post-traumatic growth. I laughed. I thought it was just a bad marriage and a bottle of glue. She laughed too. Sometimes healing starts with a bad decision that leads to a better one. I said yes. The lecture hall was full. Rows of young faces looking up at me, curious, sympathetic, a little shocked when I introduced myself. Most of you probably heard the sensational version of my story. I began. The wife who glued her cheating husband. The woman who went viral for revenge. I paused. That's not the story I came to tell you today. I told them about silence, about learning to sit with anger instead of feeding it, about realizing that vengeance doesn't restore what was lost, it only reminds you how much power you once had, and how sometimes reclaiming your life doesn't look like forgiveness or fury. It looks like planting tomatoes again in your backyard because you finally feel safe enough to grow things. When I finished, a girl in the front row raised her hand. She asked, Do you think you'd do it again if you could go back? I smiled. No, but I understand why I did it then. I was drowning, and rage was the only thing that made me feel like I could swim. She nodded slowly. That makes sense. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes, you don't tell your story to teach you, tell it so others know they're not crazy for feeling what they feel. After that talk, invitations kept coming. Podcasts, women's conferences, small-town panels. People didn't want the gossip anymore, they wanted the growth. I started a foundation called Reclaim, a small community group that helped women rediscover themselves after betrayal or emotional abuse. We didn't talk about the men. We talked about rediscovering joy, painting, hiking, writing, breathing again. At first, it was just 10 women in my living room with tea and cookies. Then 20, then 50. Before long, we had chapters in 3 states. One day, during a meeting, a woman stood up and said, Juliet, I came here broken, but now I wake up happy. I don't even check my phone for his texts anymore. Everyone clapped, but I couldn't speak for a moment. Because I knew that feeling, that quiet freedom when you finally stop waiting for someone else's apology. After they left, I sat alone, surrounded by half-empty teacups, the smell of cinnamon in the air, and I whispered to myself, this is my legacy, not the scandal, not the story that went viral, but the ripple that came after. A few months later, Mark came to visit with his new girlfriend, Emma. She was kind, soft-spoken, and nothing like Lila. Watching them laugh together in the kitchen made something inside me unclench. For years, that room had felt cursed. Now it was just a kitchen again with the sound of family, not betrayal. After dinner, Mark pulled me aside. "Mom," he said, "I read your book." "My what?" He grinned. "Your collection of essays. You know the one they published last month?" I blinked. "You actually read that?" "Twice," he said. "And I'm proud of you. You turned pain into purpose. I think Dad would have been proud too." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said softly, "Maybe. But I didn't do it for him." "I know," he smiled. "You did it for us. And maybe, for the first time, that was true." Later that night, I walked outside. The sky was full of stars, the kind you forget exist when life gets noisy. I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, and just listened to crickets, to wind, to the heartbeat of a life that finally felt mine again. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who smiled through betrayal, who stayed quiet to keep the peace. She deserved better, and I finally gave it to her. People always ask me if I believe in karma. I don't know, but I believe in consequences and in choices. And I believe that what we do with our pain determines the kind of person we become after it. The next morning, I found a small box on my porch. New name, new note. Inside was a keychain shaped like a phoenix wings spread wide, fire etched into gold. Just one word engraved, rise. I didn't need to know who sent it, because I already knew what it meant. I walked back inside, poured myself a cup of coffee, and turned on the radio. They were playing a song I hadn't heard in decades, "I Will Survive." I laughed out loud, because maybe that's what all of this had been leading to, not just surviving, but thriving. As the music filled the kitchen, I whispered the same words I'd written on my first page a year ago. I thought revenge would make me powerful, but telling my story made me free. I closed my eyes, letting the morning light spill across the room. This was my life now, quiet, full, honest. And for once, it was enough. Pain built the woman I was. Peace built the woman I am. And legacy, that's what happens when you choose to rise instead of remain. It's been 2 years since everything happened. 2 years since the glue, the chaos, the fire trucks, and the silence after. And sometimes, when I water the plants on my porch, I almost can't believe I was that woman. The woman who stood outside her own kitchen window, watching her husband kiss her daughter-in-law. The woman who said nothing, then did something unforgettable. But that's the thing about pain, it changes shape over time. It stops screaming and starts whispering. It doesn't disappear, it just becomes part of the scenery. Now, my mornings are quiet. I wake up, make coffee, feed the cat, and sit by the window with the sun warming my face. There's peace in repetition. There's comfort in knowing the next chapter isn't about them anymore, it's about me. Last month, my foundation, Reclaim, celebrated its first anniversary. We had more than 100 women gathered in the same hall where I once gave my first talk. Some brought flowers, others brought stories. All brought courage. As I looked around the room, I realized something beautiful. Every woman there had turned her own pain into purpose. Different stories, same fire. One of them, Claire, from Ohio, stood up and said, "Juliet, you once said healing isn't tidy. You were right, but it's also not lonely anymore." The room went silent, then erupted in applause. That line, "It's not lonely anymore," hit me harder than anything I'd heard all year. Because for so long, I thought strength meant doing everything alone. Turns out, it means showing others how to rise with you. After the event, a journalist asked, "If you could talk to your younger self, before all this, what would you tell her?" I didn't even have to think. I'd tell her that loving someone deeply doesn't mean losing yourself completely, and that sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is start over. She smiled. "That's beautiful." I laughed. It took me 55 years to believe it. That night, I went home and opened my old journal, the one that started it all. On the first page, my handwriting trembled, "How I became the villain and survived it." I smiled. Then I turned to the last page and wrote, "How I became myself and stayed." It felt like closing a book that had finally told the whole truth. A few weeks later, I visited Tom's grave. Yes, He'd passed away quietly last winter. Mark called me when it happened. He wanted you to know he was sorry, he said. At first, I didn't want to go. But grief has a way of showing up whether you're ready or not. The cemetery was quiet that morning. Cold wind, gray sky, the smell of wet leaves. I stood by the simple headstone. Thomas Bennett, beloved father and husband. For a long moment, I just stared at those words. Then I whispered, "You were loved, you were forgiven, and you were a fool." I laughed through tears. Because that's the strange mercy of time. It lets you miss what was good without craving what was bad. I left a single white rose on the grave and walked away. No dramatic music, no final line, just quiet release. Back home, Mark and Emma came over with news they're expecting their first child. When they told me, I froze, then cried, then laughed. Life has a wicked sense of timing. Later that night, Mark said, "I hope she grows up brave, like you." I smiled. Bravery looks different every generation. She won't need revenge to find her power. He nodded, and in that moment, I knew my legacy wasn't my story, it was them. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still replay that day in my mind, the kitchen, the kiss, the betrayal. But the picture doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a scene in a film that already rolled credits. Because in the end, we all become our own editors. We decide what stays in the frame and what fades to black. Last week, I got a message from a viewer. She said, "Juliet, I watched your story at 2 a.m., crying on my bathroom floor. You made me believe it's not too late to start over." I wrote back simply, "It's never too late. Just promise me, start with yourself. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Forgiveness doesn't mean inviting people back in. It means giving yourself permission to move forward without them." Now, as I sit here recording this final part of my story, I realize it's not really about revenge or betrayal or even forgiveness. It's about becoming the woman I always hoped I'd be when the world stopped watching. Becoming the kind of person who can look at her scars and call them art. Becoming whole again, on her own terms. The camera's red light blinks softly. My reflection stares back older, wiser, still fierce. And I say for the last time, this isn't a confession anymore. It's a testimony. Because surviving isn't enough. We deserve to live, laugh, and rise. I pause, smile, and whisper, almost to myself, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. For every woman who's ever been betrayed, your story doesn't end there. It begins with you. It's funny how, when life finally quiets down, you start to hear your own voice again. Not the one that screams inside you when you're hurt, the one that whispers when you're healed. It's been 3 years now. 3 years since that day in the kitchen. 3 years since I stopped being someone's wife and started being myself. And this morning, as I sit on my porch with the sunrise bleeding gold across the horizon, I realize I don't think about revenge anymore. I think about rhythm, the steady beat of peace. The air smells like rain and lilac. Somewhere down the street, kids are laughing on their way to school. Life goes on, as it always does, with or without your permission. But this time, I'm part of it, not trapped behind it. Every so often, someone recognizes me. At the grocery store, the post office, sometimes even in church. They whisper, "Aren't you the lady from that story?" And I smile and say, "I used to be." Because I'm not that woman anymore, the one defined by what was done to her. I'm the woman who built something new from it. Something solid, something worth leaving behind. The foundation has grown beyond what I imagined. There are now chapters in 12 states. Every week, I hear stories from women who found their voice because they heard mine first. One wrote, "You made me believe that I could live after betrayal, not just exist." Another said, "You didn't just glue them together, you glued yourself back together." Those words hit me harder than any headline ever could. Because legacy isn't what you leave for people, it's what you leave in them. A few weeks ago, I was invited to speak at a women's retreat in Vermont. The theme was Resilience After Ruin. When I walked onto the stage, I looked out at hundreds of faces, mothers, daughters, friends, each carrying their own invisible battles. I began softly. I once thought revenge was my victory, but now I know peace was the real prize. They listened in silence, the kind that isn't empty but sacred. When I finished, there were tears. Not because the story was sad, but because it was true. And after the event, a young woman came to me, shaking. She said, "My mom lived your story. She never found closure. But watching you, I think I just did it for her. I hugged her. Because that's the power of truth. It heals even those who didn't ask for it. That night, back in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window and looked at the moon, full and silver, and thought about all the women who had ever been betrayed, broken, or silenced. I whispered to the night, this story was never just mine. And maybe that's the final lesson, that healing isn't about erasing pain, but transforming it into something that keeps others warm. When I came home, I found a letter waiting in my mailbox. It was from Emma, my son's wife, soon to be a mother. She wrote, Juliet, I know our daughter will hear stories about what happened in this family. But when she does, I want her to know this, that her grandmother was fierce, but also kind. That she didn't just survive, she taught the world how to start again. I cried reading it. Not from sadness, from awe. Because somewhere between the fire and the forgiveness, my family found its heartbeat again. Now, every morning, I sit in the garden I once thought I'd abandon. The flowers bloom where the ashes used to be. And I think, maybe life doesn't always give you second chances. Sometimes, it gives you a chance to rewrite the first one. So, I keep writing. Stories, letters, speeches, anything that helps someone else rise a little faster than I did. Because if my story began with betrayal, it will end with belonging. I often end my talks with this line, and I'll end this story with it too. To every woman who's ever been lied to, left behind, or laughed at, you are not the wound. You are the scar that proves you healed. I pause, let it sink in, and then add softly, don't wait for closure, be it. The camera fades back in me, sitting on that same porch, where everything once fell apart. Different morning, same chair. Only now, the woman sitting there is whole. I lift my coffee mug, smile at the lens and say, and that's my story, not of revenge, but of resurrection. The screen fades to black. Text appears in white. For every woman who thought it was too late, it's not. If you've come this far, you've lived this story with me. Maybe not the glue, maybe not the kitchen, but the heartbreak, the silence, the decision to finally stand up. This story wasn't just about punishment, it was about power, your power. So, if you felt something, if you cried, laughed, or whispered, good for her. Hit subscribe. Because this channel isn't about scandal, it's about survival. It's about women reclaiming their stories one confession at a time. Share this video with someone who needs to remember. You can be broken and still brilliant. You can lose everything and still find yourself. And maybe, just maybe, the next story we tell won't be about revenge, but about the kind of peace that comes after you stop chasing closure and start creating it. I was the fire, now I'm the light. Subscribe for more family revenge stories. Stories that start in betrayal, but end in rebirth. Because healing can be viral too.